Welcome back. In this lecture series, previously we were talking about the high availability, that is, explaining about the 99.999% of high availability, that is, five nines. In this section, we try to discuss the measures to improve the availability. So, in that measures to improve the availability, we are going to talk about the asset identification, and we talk about the difference in depth, redundancy, and system resiliencies. So we'll talk about the asset management. So in the asset management, an organization needs to know what hardware and software are present as a prerequisite prerequisite to knowing what the configuration parameters need to be. So, asset management includes a complete inventory of hardware and software. So, this means that the organization needs to know all of components that can be subject to security risk, including every hardware system, every operating system, every hardware network devices, every network device operating system, every software application, all firmware, all language runtime environments, all individual libraries. So, an organization may choose an automated solution to keep track of assets. An administrator, uh, you know, um, as an administrator should investigate any changed configuration because it may mean that the configuration is not up to date. So it can also mean that unauthorized changes are happening. So these are few asset management things which we just discussed, right? So we'll see. The next is, what are these asset classification, because there are many things that every hardware system in the organization, and on those hardware system what operating system is running. If that device is connected to the network, then what the network devices are there, what are their hardwares like routers, switches, and what operating system is running on those hardware devices. So to classify this, the asset classification is required. So asset classification assigns all resources of an organization into a group based on common characteristics. An organization should apply an asset classification system to documents, data records, data files, and disks. The most critical information needs to receive the highest level of protection and may even require special handling. An organization can adopt a leveling system according to how valuable, how sensitive, and how critical the information is. Complete the, these are the following steps to identify complete these following steps to identify and classify the assets of an organization. So that is, one is, determine the proper asset identification category. The first one, the identification category. Establish asset accountability by identifying the owner for all information assets and application software. Third one is, determine the criteria for classifications. Some required some criteria like for confidentiality, value, time, access rights, something like that. And fourth one is implement a classification scheme, implementing this classification scheme. So what is the, in this, you can adopt the uniform way of identifying information to ensure the information protection. So for example, the US government uses sensitivity to classify data as follows, like, top secret, secret, confidentiality, public trust, and unclassified. So these are the basic steps to identify and classify the assets for managing the asset management system. So then it requires the asset standardization. So yeah, this is what we just discussed, the asset classification. So in the asset standardization, the asset management manages the life cycle and inventory of technology assets, including devices and softwares. So, as part of an IT asset management system, an organization specifies the acceptable IT assets that meet its objectives. So, this practice effectively reduces the different asset types. For example, an organization will only install applications that meet its guidelines. When administrators eliminate applications that do not meet the guidelines, they are effectively increase security. So, asset standards identify specific hardware and software products that the organization uses and supports. When a failure occurs, prompt action helps to maintain both accesses and security. If an organization does not standardize its hardware selection, personnel may need to scramble to find a replacement component. Non-standard environments requires more expertise to manage, and they increase the cost of maintenance contracts and inventory. So here, you just click on this particular link to read more about this asset standardization. So that gives, how the military shifted to, standard based hardware and software components for installation for its military communication. So then in this measures to, improve this high availability, like in, asset management, there is required to identify the threat. Identification is also required, because if your hardware and software is good, you have a good hardware and have good software. But even though there is a possibility that if any patches are missing on the operating system which you are running, so then definitely there will be some, the vulnerabilities will be there. So how to protect your system? So that threat identification is one of the important one. So the United States Computer Emergency Readiness Team, that is US-30, we call the Computer Emergency Readiness Team, and the US Department of Homeland Security sponsor a dictionary of common vulnerabilities and exposure, CVE we call. So any the updated vulnerabilities are there on the target system, they can easily identified, and that will be placed in this particular database, the common vulnerabilities and exposure database. So CVE contains a standard identifier number with a brief description and references to related vulnerability reports and advisories. So the ITRE, we said that Mitri Corporation that maintains the common vulnerability and exposure. So, threat identification begins with the process of creating a common vulnerabilities and exposure, the identifier for the publicly known cybersecurity vulnerabilities. So each CVE identifier, which includes the CVE identifier number, its brief description of that security vulnerability, whether it is related to the operating system, whether it is related to the network services, that means the network ports. You might have heard about the SSH port, Telnet port, FTP port, your AnyDesk port, or remote desktop ports. So different ports are there, like port number 21, 22, 23, 25, port number 443, and so on, and any important references. So, to get more information about this vulnerability identifier in these common vulnerabilities and exposure, you can click here to you can get all the related vulnerabilities and their service impacts. The next, once you identify the threats, then what is the risk about this threat? So that is the risk analysis comes into the picture. So, risk analysis is the process of analyzing the dangers based by natural and human caused events to the assets of an organization. So, a user performs an asset identification to help determine which assets to protect. A risk analysis has four goals. First, needs to identify assets and their cost or their value. Second goal is identify the vulnerabilities. Is there any vulnerabilities on those assets? For example, if you have a server is an asset, and what's its cost? And identify the vulnerabilities on server, like which operating system is running on the server. Is there any vulnerabilities? If suppose, for example, Windows operating system is running on the server, is there any missing patches are there or not? If is there any missing patches, that will lead to execute the remote code execution may be possible. So that is one threat. So you need to identify what is vulnerability and what threats are there because of those vulnerabilities. And third one is you need to quantify the probability and impact of the identified threat, whether it is going to damage the only the server or the entire network in the organization. And the fourth one is balance the impact of the threat against the cost of the countermeasures. So in this, you can find two different risks. One, different risks that you can find. One is the quantitative risk analysis. So in the quantitative, two types of approaches to this risk analysis. One is quantitative risk analysis and qualitative risk analysis. So let us see this. What is quantitative risk analysis? Look at the picture. A quantitative analysis assigns numbers to the risk analysis process. So in this figure, you can see that the asset value is the replacement cost of the asset. So here you can see that what is this asset? Asset is the file server. Threat is the file server failure. That is the single loss the expectancy. So that cost around $15,000. So annualized rate of this occupancies, it is around 15% chances. So the value of an asset can also be measured by the income gained through use of that asset. So the exposure factor is a subjective value expressed as a percentage that an asset losses due to a particular threat. If a total loss occurs, the exposure factor equals to 1, that is 100%. In the quantitative example, the server has an asset value of $15,000 here. When the server fails, a total loss occurs, that is the exposure factor equals to 1. The asset value of $15,000 multiplied by the exposure factor of 1 results in a single loss expectancy of $15,000. So the annualized rate of occurrence, that ARO, is the probability that a loss will occur during the year, also expressed as a percentage. And ARO, the annualized rate of occurrence, can be greater than 100% if a loss can occur more than once a year. The calculation of the actual loss expectancy gives management some guidance on what it should spend to protect the asset. So that it gives the annualized loss expectancy. So this is the quantitative example of asset management. Another one is the qualitative one. Okay, yeah, this is what just we just discussed. Another one is the qualitative risk analysis. So a qualitative risk analysis uses opinions and scenarios. So this figure provides an example of table used in qualitative risk analysis, which plots the likelihood of a threat against its impact. For example, the threat of a server failure may be likely, but its impact may only be marginal. So a team evaluates each threat to an asset and plots it in the table. The team ranks the results and uses the results as a guide. They may determine to take action on only threats that fall within the red zone. So the numbers used in the table do not directly relate to any aspects of the analysis. For example, a catastrophic impact of 4 in this table, you can see that, is not twice as bad as a marginal impact of the, the, the marginal impact of 2 in this frequent or likely, occasional, your seldom or unlikely. So this method is subjective in nature than objective, right? Okay. So this is the different risk analysis for the given asset management. The next one is mitigation. How do we, yeah, this is what just we discussed. The mitigation. So in the mitigation, in the mitigation strategies for your asset management, to improve the availability by using the 5-9 concept. So mitigation involves reducing the security or reducing the severity of the loss or the likelihood of the loss from occurring. So many technical controls mitigate risk, including authentication system or authentication systems, if there are more systems, file permissions, and firewalls. Organizations and security professionals must understand that risk mitigation can have both positive and negative impact on the organization. Good risk mitigation finds a balance between the negative impact of countermeasures and controls and the benefit of risk reduction. So there are four common ways to reduce this risk reductions in this mitigation strategy. One is accept, reduce, avoid, and transfer. So what is accept? The accept the risk and periodically reassess. That means in this accept, periodically reassess accepted risk in ongoing processes as a normal feature of business. A normal feature of your businesses, the business operations, and modify mitigation measures accordingly. The next one is reduce mitigation strategy. So, in this reduce mitigation strategy, that design a new business process with adequate built-in risk control and containment measures from the start. The third one is avoid mitigation strategy. So, a avoid risk altogether would include measures such as physically disconnecting from the internet. And the fourth mitigation strategy is transfer. So, transfer risk to an external agency, that is a service level agreement or the insurance company. So, a short term strategy is to accept the risk, necessitating the creation of contingency plans for that risk. So, people and organizations have to accept risk on a daily basis. Modern methodologies reduce risk by developing software incrementally and providing regular updates and patches to address vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. Outsourcing services, purchasing insurance, or purchasing maintenance contracts are all examples of risk transfer. Hiring specialists to perform critical tasks to reduce the risk can be a good decision and yield greater results with less long term investment. A good risk mitigation plan can include two or more strategies. So next, we'll try to see the uh, in this assetment management. So these are basic counters that you can find in the measures to improve the availability in the asset management. One is asset identification, asset classification, asset standardization, then identifying the threats, then the risk analysis, and the mitigation for that. Okay, so this all comes under the, yeah, this is what just we discussed. So this all comes under the measures to improve the availability and the asset management. Thank you.